I don't know, but this one, I wish I had DNF'd it because it really truly felt like such a waste of my time. She's very much like a Disney adult. It's like very millennial coded. So it's really fascinating, but also extremely terrifying. Olis, happy April. We're officially a quarter of the year through. Happy Q2 to those who celebrate. First quarter of this year was a ride. There was some highs, but also some really low lows. And I think that is true for March as a whole for me, and then also just March in terms of reading. My lowest reading month so far this year, and also just for a long time. Like, I read a total of 5 books in March, which I know seems like a respectable amount for anybody who's not crazy like me, like us. But this was really my all-time low for the past like couple years that I've really ramped up my reading. But I don't know, it didn't feel like a reading slump per se. It just felt like I was not super into the books that I was reading, and I had like other stuff going on, so it was just a little slow. I was still pretty consistent with my reading, and I got through the books, didn't DNF anything, but just slower than usual. But there were some really good books kind of towards the end of the month. There was just one book that really, like, I was going through it, reading it, and we'll get to it. But I did read some really good ones too. So let's just get into it, shall we? The first book I read and finished this month was an audiobook, and it was Funeral for Flaca by Emily Prado. Emily with 2 L's. And this is a memoir/essay collection. So Emily is writing about her life, and each of the essays is about different aspects in her life, and they're told, or they're like structured in the book chronologically. And the audiobook is narrated by her. And I really like this audiobook. It was a quick listen. It's not very long, and I really liked the personal aspect. That's why I really like listening to memoirs via audiobook, because it kind of just feels like the author telling you their story from like a first-hand point of view. And Emily is a first-generation Latina. She grew up here in the US, and a lot of like the earlier chapters where she's talking about her childhood, she talks about being the only brown girl in her school full of white kids, and just kind of like that moment when you realize that something about you is different because of the way that you're being treated by others around you. And she also talks about kind of her tumultuous family dynamics. She didn't really have a stable family structure for a lot of her childhood, and just like the complicated feelings she has around that. And then as we move forward in time, she talks about like her struggle with school and how she eventually like overcame this, got more self-confidence, but like that she really struggled in school, and that led her to like some choices that ended up causing a lot of like pain and conflict for her. And she also talks about her identity and struggling to really develop that and find something that felt truly representative of her as a Latina, and like trying to fight all these stereotypes that the world and society tries to put on you when that doesn't really feel like who you truly are. And then as we keep going into like her young adult and adulthood, she talks about her career, and that was really interesting to hear about, because she ends up becoming a writer for like these really cool publications, and she moves to Portland. But she talks about her experiences with sexual assault and with depression and with eating disorders. So she really has been through and dealt with a lot of different complex issues. And just hearing like how she tackled those and how she got through those, and, you know, still like the ongoing like trauma and fallout and just like the things that she continues to deal with was really interesting to hear. And she's just a really good writer. The stories, they were approachable but still felt very like lyrical and beautiful. And yeah, I really enjoyed this. It was a quick listen, like I said, just because I was like really connecting with Emily and her story. And she is also a DJ, so each of these was connected, each of the essays was like connected to a song, and she has a full playlist on Spotify that you can go and listen to and kind of connect to the essays in her collection, which I thought was really cool. Yeah, overall, a very solid memoir essay collection about one Latina experience. Funeral for Flaca by Emily Prado. I definitely recommend. Okay, the first physical book that I finished this month was really a struggle to get through. And honestly, I kind of wish that I had DNF'd it. I have a problem with not being able to DNF any books. Sometimes like I'll start a book, and if I'm not hooked within the first few chapters, then I can DNF a book, and usually it's a book that I really want to read, but then I'll like just put it off to the side because it didn't feel like the right time or whatever, and then I'll come back to it. I rarely DNF a book that I'm like a significant portion of the way through, just because, I don't know, maybe I'm just hopeful that it'll get better, or like I don't know, a completionist, I'm a masochist. I don't know what it is, but if I'm like more than 25% through a book, I have trouble putting it down. And that's, I don't know, it's not the case for like shows or movies. I notoriously rarely finish series, and I can just like drop a movie if I'm not feeling it. But for books, I don't know. I'm just like, maybe, I'm sure there's a point to this. I'm sure it'll get better. I'm sure I'll enjoy it by the end. I don't know. But this one, I wish I had DNF'd it because it really truly felt like such a waste of my time. The book that I'm talking about is Talking at Night by Claire Daverly. This book, it's supposed to be an adult contemporary literary fiction / romance, but it felt 100% like a young adult book. And I feel really bad like using the term young adult in like a derogatory manner, but like it just felt like it was directed towards teenagers. And even then, like, I would not recommend any teenager to read this, because I would be like, you're gonna pick up like the wrong ideas about life and grief and love from it. So the premise of this book is we're following these two star-crossed lovers. At the beginning of the book, we're introduced to Will and Rosie as high schoolers, and we see kind of like their first meeting, the first time that they talk to each other. And then from that point on through their lives, they're kind of like forever intertwined. And the book is structured into 3 separate parts, and they're titled Before, After, and Long After. And in the epilogue, we're kind of set up for like what that event that is being referenced in the before, after sections is. So we know that there's like this big tragic event that is going to happen in their lives. The epilogue is talking about like somebody being in the hospital and something very tragic happening. So we're kind of prepped for like, okay, there's this big central event that is going to affect them somehow. So first of all, I didn't really like that. I didn't like that we were told like, oh, this central event is going to be very important, because through the first section, the before section, you're kind of just like holding your breath for whatever's going to happen. And as we're going through it, it kind of becomes a little obvious what that event is going to be. And also, I just didn't like that we're being told and we're being like very explicitly prepped for like the event, capital letters, the event. And like the fallout from that and like the emotional impact that we're being prepped for and that we expect to see play out, I felt like it never really happened. Like these characters don't really, I don't know, it didn't feel like it affected them all that much. Like we're being told, and that was a problem with the book as a whole. We're just being told a lot and it isn't really shown. So Rosie and Will are kind of these two very cliche protagonists where Will is like a quote unquote bad boy, and it doesn't really go anywhere past that. Like he's just like this bad boy, no real reason. Like he just is, like, from their teenage years, a very brooding, dark, like he's like the hottest guy in school, but he's like so dangerous. He rides a motorcycle. He like slacks off in class, but he's actually like a super genius. He doesn't want to go to college because what is he going to do with a degree? He doesn't care about academics, but he's so smart. He's tutoring Rosie's brother because he's so smart, even though he doesn't care. And Rosie is like the stereotypical opposite of that. She's a good girl. She follows all the rules. She doesn't go to parties. She doesn't hang out with people like Will. She gets good grades. She plays the piano. That's, she follows all the rules. So very stereotypical, and they never break out of those stereotypes. That's just what they are for the entire book. And these things that define them, I feel like the author kind of tries to delve into that a little deeper, but it never really goes anywhere. So yeah, the premise is that they're like in love with each other, but it's always like wrong place, wrong time. Like they're, because of who they are at the core, like they're just wrong for each other, but they can never truly be together, but they can never truly like let go of the love that they feel for the other person. Blah, blah, blah. Like, I was so annoyed. Like, there's just no depth to these characters the entire time. This book, every time I see, like, a recommendation for this book, it's always, like, for fans of normal people. So it gets compared to Normal People a lot because you have these two characters who are, like, very different from each other. They're kind of, like, opposites. And then they become intertwined. And then throughout their entire lives, like, they're kind of trying to break free, but like not being able to extract themselves from like this relationship that keeps them intertwined. But Sally Rooney, I feel like what is so unique and great about her novels is that character exploration. She really delves deep into like the human psyche, the human condition, like what it means to be a human in society right now. She does a great job of that. And that was nowhere to be found in Talking at Night. These characters are so one-dimensional, and Sally Rooney's characters feel like they change and grow and evolve as we follow them through their lives. That was something that I really loved about Normal People, that we got to see like where some of that trauma comes from and how they deal with it. And Claire Daverly's characters, unfortunately, they just stayed the same throughout the entire novel. There was no growth and like not even like any delving into like what makes them how they are. I feel like she relied a lot on like these traumatic events happening in their lives and like using that as an explanation for like the way that they are, the way that they interact with each other. But it was all just very like, you're telling me, but I'm really not seeing it through the character explorations. So yeah, just hated this one, hated it overall. I don't know, I kept waiting for something to change, and I should have just DNF'd it, because the more it went on, the more I resented it and hated it. And I just really hated these characters. Like, they're so unlikable, and like I can deal with unlikable if it's, explained or explored, or like if there's anything deeper about them, but there wasn't. And Yeah, unfortunate, but it is what it is. If you liked Normal People just for like two sad, brooding characters and seeing them like never be able to be together, and that's all that you liked about Normal People, maybe you'll like this book. If what you liked about Normal People was the deep character analysis and commentary on society and commentary on relationships and how our grief and trauma and experiences make us who we are and how we treat other people and interact with each other, I don't recommend this book for you because there was none of that. So that was Talking at Night. I gave it 2 stars and I feel like that was a little generous, but you know, I got through it. Oh, also another thing is that, like Sally Rooney's books, there were no quotation marks, and I hated it. I feel like it works for Sally Rooney's books, but only because everything else is so good. Like, you'll forgive it from Sally Rooney because she's such a good writer, but it doesn't work for anyone else but Sally Rooney. Well, I haven't seen it in anybody else, but Claire Daverley, this book, and like, it was fine for the most part, but there were some paragraphs and sections of the book where I was like, I don't really understand like what is actually being said and what is like a thought, and it's not clear to me like who this is coming from sometimes. So yeah, it was distracting, and I think if she was trying to emulate or like trying to be Sally Rooney reminiscent, it didn't really work, and she should have just used quotation marks. That's just my opinion. And in the spirit of being annoyed at this book for telling but not showing, I am going to show you what I mean, and hopefully you understand why I was so annoyed at this book and the writing. I'm just going to read some out of context quotes and maybe you'll understand what I mean. I don't even know, like, I try to erase this book from my memory, so I can't even tell you the general context of these, but let's just read a couple. Things are rarely deserving of such hype. I disagree, she says. The Beatles, Led Zeppelin, Beyonce, that's an eclectic list. The Beatles, Beyonce, so eclectic. So eclectic. Okay, oh, one thing about Rosie, she's a songwriter. That's like her defying conventions, defying what the world expects of her quirk and talent. Rosie has run out of paper. She's been writing on discarded scraps from the printer, but there's none left, and she has more to say, so she takes her pen and writes the rest across her wrist, down the entire length of her arms. So, and then this becomes kind of like a running thing throughout the novel, and something that makes her so deep and different is that she writes her poetry and she writes her songs on her arms. Like, girl, come on. Imagine you're a grown woman just walking down the street looking like you're going to the Fearless tour. Just buy a notepad. What are you doing? Okay, this one, I actually do remember the context of this because I just thought this was so ridiculous, but Will is flying to, like, he feels like he wants to escape. He buys a flight to Thailand, but this is the paragraph. This feels different, more desperate and heavy, like he needs to climb out of it before it crushes him. And because he can't stop, he must act. So the next day, he buys his plane ticket. Asia first, Thailand. He likes pad thai, and the flights were cheap, and that is as much thought as he gives it. Thailand, because I love pad thai. What? And then he cancels his flight. He ends up not going, and he's like, it's fine. I make pretty decent pad thai. This is Rosie talking right now. She says, I wish I'd done everything on earth with you. The street is quiet, no cars or closing doors, just them and her voice on the linen dry wind. It's not mine, she says. The quote. But it's beautiful, isn't it? He nods, but barely, because he is not used to such talk. And I feel it, Rosie says, still with that smile of hers. I was just thinking that I feel it. So, you know, using somebody else's very famous and very trite quote to describe a very central scene and emotion in the book is just kind of like the epitome of what this book was. So I'll just leave it at that. Yeah, overall, hated this book. Glad I get to rant about it for a little bit, but it did put me in a bit of a reading slump after I finished it. But it is what it is. We got through it. The rest of the month was fine reading-wise, but just this one took me forever to get through because I was like so insistent on finishing it, even though I should have DNF'd it, but it is what it is. We live and we learn. On to the next, which was The Dead Romantics by Ashley Poston. And this was a audiobook listen. I have read one other Ashley Poston book. Last year I read The 7-Year Slip, and I really enjoyed that one. Do I have The 7-Year Slip? Maybe not. I think I lent it to a friend, but I have a copy because I really enjoyed it. Ashley Poston writes romances, but she always incorporates like a fun little supernatural or magical realism element to her stories, which I enjoy a lot. And in this book, the twist is that she falls in love with a ghost. So we're following Florence Day, who is a ghost writer for a very famous romance writer. So there's a lot of like fun, tongue-in-cheek, ghostly elements to the story. So she's a ghost writer. Her family owns a funeral home and she can talk to ghosts. So this is something that her and her father share. And because the family business was owning a funeral home, she grew up with a lot of like death constantly around her, but not like in a sad, tragic way. She was just kind of used to death, and sometimes the spirits of the recently deceased would come to her and she would have to like talk to them and help them come to terms with their death and help them move on and cross over to the afterlife. So that's just something about her. And when we meet her, she's struggling with the latest book that she's supposed to be writing for this famous romance author because she recently went through a really bad breakup and she's like feeling very lost and she doesn't really believe in happy endings anymore. And she's supposed to be writing a romance book, but she's like, this is all bullshit. So that's the struggle that she's currently going through. Of course, there's like this hot new editor that she meets and is like instantly smitten with, but he's like, hello, you owe me a book. And she's like, damn, okay, I've got to figure out a way to finish this book or break the news to this editor that I'm not going to be able to. So that's one conflict. But then she receives a phone call with some really bad news. She has to fly back to her childhood home to be with her family, deal with this news, and just confront some of the things that she's been trying to run away from emotionally. And then there's also a fun little romance with a ghost intertwined into it. I can't really delve more into the plot because it gets a little spoilery, but it was a very sweet read. I think Ashley Poston does a really good job of like writing very sweet, funny romances that feel overall very lighthearted, but then she also really delves into, or at least in the two books that I've read, 7-Year Slip and The Dead Romantics, she delves a lot into grief and like family relationships and death, and she does so in a way that feels very real and raw. Like it feels like she really has gone through this and has dealt with it in like a very healthy way. And I don't know, even though the tone overall of her books is like very lighthearted, and I think they can be categorized strongly as romances, like she's still able to incorporate these other aspects in ways that feel very natural and like done with a lot of care. So I really enjoyed this one. There's not much to say about it because for me it was like a very quick, easy read, but it wasn't life-changing, but it was a fun break from like the slog that Talking at Night was putting me through. The only thing that kind of was not my favorite about this book was how it's a contemporary romance, so like it references like the real world a lot and very often. And I feel like Ashley Poston is just kind of chuggy. She's very much like a Disney adult. It's like a little cringy in some of its references and some of its language, very millennial coded, but I don't know. It wasn't like distracting enough that it made me hate the story overall or anything. Just a little, and sometimes the things she says, I'm like, okay. Cringe, elder millennial friend, but overall I still really enjoyed it. I think I gave it 4 stars, 3.5 stars. I think really it's sitting somewhere between there, like 3.75, but yeah, not life-changing. I didn't like it as much as I enjoyed The 7-Year Slip, but I can't really pinpoint exactly why. I think it was just like a overall vibes thing, but yeah, not a bad one. I enjoyed. The only other physical book that I finished last month was Gods of Jade and Shadow by Silvia Moreno Garcia, which has been on my shelf for a hot minute, so I finally got around to it, and I'm very glad that I did because it was just like such a breath of fresh air after the only other physical book that I read this month. This is my 4th Silvia Moreno Garcia, although this is one of her earlier ones. This was written before Mexican Gothic, which I think is her most famous novel, but this came out in 2019, I believe, and Mexican Gothic came out in 2020. So this is even before she got really popular, because I think Mexican Gothic really kind of put her on the mainstream map. But this one, like her other novels, follows a female protagonist who is from Mexico, and it's infused with a lot of like history, a lot of culture, a lot of magical elements, which are all things that Silvia Moreno Garcia does so well and that I really vibe with and enjoy. So in this story, we are following Casiopea, who is a young woman in 1920s Mexico. She lives in a small town in the Yucatan Peninsula, and her family is pretty well off. They're a well-to-do family, but she is very mistreated by them, especially the men in her family. Her grandfather, who is like the patriarch of the family, and also her cousin Martin, who is just very dismissive and abusive to her, and her mother, because her mother kind of disgraced the family by marrying a indigenous man, Casiopea's father, who then passed away, and they had to come back to the family to live with their grandfather, but they're kind of not excommunicated, but just treated very poorly by her family. They're basically relegated to being their servants. So Casiopea, you know, she understandably is really desperately wanting to leave her home and just like go out and adventure the world, because she's heard about, you know, the roaring 20s, all the things happening in the big city. She really wants to go and dance and cut her hair short and drive a car and just experience the world outside of her small constraining town. And one day she's particularly angry at her grandfather, and she goes into his room where he keeps a locked chest that's very intriguing to her, and her grandfather like refuses to talk about it. He usually wears like a key around his neck that he doesn't let anybody touch, but for some reason this day he leaves it behind. Casiopea opens the trunk and inadvertently revives a previously imprisoned god of the underworld. So this god's name is Juncame, and he is the lord of Xibalba, the Mayan underworld. And because Casiopea was the one to free him, she becomes kind of intertwined into his life and his quest to return to his realm of the underworld and defeat his twin brother, who is the one who imprisoned him with the help of Casiopea's grandfather and took over his throne. So they embark on this journey to find his brother and get some things that he stole from him, and those things being pieces of his physical body. He's like missing an eye, missing an ear, missing a finger. So he needs to go track those down, get them back so he can return to his full powerful form and defeat his brother, get his kingdom back. And Cassiopeia is now tied to him and has to go on this journey with him. So it's just a really cool journey adventure book, and we start off in Yucatan, and then the story takes us through other parts of Mexico. We go to Mexico City, El Paso, Baja California, and it's just really cool. I always love Silvia Moreno Garcia's descriptions and her characterizations. She's always she just like transports you to that time and setting, and like it just always feels so well researched and like rooted in history. And I just really love her style of writing. Just feels very like it transports you and it really feels authentic. I really always, in all her novels, appreciate her characterization of her protagonists. They're always like really strong, independent, and feisty Mexican women. And I think there's like the danger of her falling into kind of like a typecast and always writing the same women, because I think that description can be applied to all her protagonists, but somehow they all feel very distinct and they all have like their own personalities and desires and things driving them. So I just really appreciate how she's able to do that but not fall into like she's writing the same characters over and over again. Cassiopeia felt very unique while still inhabiting or embodying these traits. I always appreciate how there's like a little bit of romance infused into her stories, but it's not the central point. It's not the main driving factor for the plot. It's just like a fun addition. And she also always includes and highlights the issues of the time periods that she's writing about in Mexico. So in this one, she talks about, with Cassiopeia's family, kind of the patriarchal structures, and then just in general how women were starting to gain more rights in the 1920s, but they were still very restricted and oppressed. And within her own family, that's also incredibly clear. And she also talks about the discrimination towards indigenous groups and the discrimination that she felt directed towards her because she was of indigenous descent, and just like the colorism that is so prevalent even to this day in Mexico, but especially in the early 20th century. Yeah, just very cool inclusion of like Mayan culture, Mayan history. I don't think I had ever heard of these particular stories of the Xibalban gods and of the underworld and just like their different tales and beliefs. That was really cool to read about. And yeah, this was kind of a standout of the month. I really enjoyed it. It took me a while to get through it, but not because I wasn't enjoying it. I don't know, I guess happened to be doing a lot of stuff outside of reading while I was reading this, but it was very nice to come back to this and just follow along in the journey. And I think now this stands as one of my top Silvia Moreno Garcia books. I've read 4. I think Mexican Gothic is still my number 1. I haven't read it since that first read, which introduced me to Silvia Moreno Garcia, but that was one of the books that kind of got me really back into reading, because I realized like, oh wow, like there's these incredible books that mix culture with fantasy and adventure and romance, and it was unlike anything I had read before, so that really got me back into reading, and that holds a special place in my heart. But I think this is up there now. It might be my number 2 now. I've read those 2 as well as The Daughter of Dr. Moreau and Silver Nitrate. I've enjoyed them all, but I think this is now sitting at number 2. I really, really like this one, and looking forward to reading some more Silvia Moreno Garcia in the future. There's still plenty that I need to catch up on her catalog. So yeah, I gave Gods of Jade and Shadow 4 stars. The last book of the month was an audiobook, and it was Your Face Belongs to Us by Kashmir Hill. This is a nonfiction investigative journalism book by Kashmir Hill, who is a New York Times reporter. And the book is a investigative piece on Clearview AI, who is a company that is kind of on the forefront of facial recognition technology. It's one of the top companies for that kind of software in the United States. So Kashmir Hill is following that company's story from its inception and how the founder, Juan Tat, kind of where he got his start and how it came to be like this really powerful and huge but very secretive company in the United States. So we're following the story of the company, and then she also intersperses that with history of facial recognition in general. The way that this company and a lot of facial recognition companies are being used at the moment, the most prominent use for them is quote-unquote public safety, and their main clients are police departments across the United States. So it's kind of tied with biometric data being used to criminalize people and to pinpoint suspects, and the debate about that. And just so Kashmir Hill talks about other times throughout history where things like biometric data have been used and just the issues that they present sometimes. She goes as far back as to the conception of eugenics and using like general facial and bodily characteristics to make judgments and assumptions about a person and their character, which was then directly tied to fingerprinting and using a big fingerprint database to identify people, how that became popularized. And she also talks about AI in general and the different types of AI algorithms and how those have developed throughout time, because those are like the two main components of facial recognition software. Is the AI component, which is able to incredibly accurately compare faces and identify when faces are the same person. And then the other part is the database of photos of people and mapping facial features for the algorithm to then be able to identify them as the same person. So it's really fascinating, but also extremely terrifying. And one of the main takeaways of this book was that, and it's not just applicable to this case of facial recognition, but in general, technology and AI is moving at a pace that policy and lawmaking and protections for individuals and our privacy can't really keep up with. So these companies existed long before people were aware of just how powerful the technology was becoming. And especially Clearview AI, they were operating very discreetly for a long time. Kashmir Hill talks about how hard it was to get a hold of anybody from the company. They would use like fake LinkedIn profiles to promote the company. They would put fake addresses in company records, and it was just really hard to track down anybody who could speak for the company. And then when she did track people down, they would just try their hardest to avoid her. And the way that she actually finally got a hold of the company was going directly to their clients, who happened to be police departments. The police departments are very happy to talk about this product because they love it, because it works so well. They have been using it for a long time. They want to continue using it and promote it. So they were happy to speak to her, but then as soon as she tried to make contact further up, they cut off communication. Because Clearview AI knew that they were kind of skirting legality, and they didn't really want this to be like a widespread known thing because of just the privacy and legal issues that they might have to face. So obviously Clearview AI is not the only facial recognition software out there right now, but it's just one of the more prominent ones in the US, and it's the one that this book focuses on. But Kashmir Hill also talks about other companies that are developing this software, developing this technology, and she talks about how Google, Facebook, they all have the capacity for a very robust facial recognition software, and they have the capacity to roll it out. But because of how murky the legal waters are at the moment, they have decided to put a stop to it for the time being, but they do have the capacity to roll it out on a mass scale. And it's just very kind of chilling and dystopian. But the way that Clearview AI was able to rise to prominence and have such a powerful software was because they were kind of throwing caution to the wind and not really thinking about future legal repercussions. So the database that they have of faces is scraped from a lot of places on the internet. They were talking about Venmo, Facebook. They have algorithms that are just constantly scraping all the information off of these sites. They've gotten cease and desist from a lot of big companies, but by the time they're served by these cease and desist letters, and by the time privacy advocates try to put a stop to it, it's like too late. They already have all of these billions of photos. They already have all this information. They're already using it to run the software that now thousands of police departments across the country have access to and really have come to depend on. So now there's like a larger legal battle, and it's really terrifying. But in general, as an audiobook, very, very interesting, very addictive. It's not a very long one, and I listen to a lot of like New York Times, NPR type podcasts, and this felt just like a long form version of that. Kashmir Hill is great. She narrates the audiobook, and it's just very gripping and so interesting and terrifying. And it really makes me question everything. It makes me question putting these videos out there, because she also talks about how now people are starting to build other biometric databases, for example, voice profiles. In the future, that'll probably be something that people will be able to be recognized by just by hearing a clip of your voice. They'll be able to pinpoint your identity, and really makes me question like everything that I've agreed to when I sign up for social media accounts and things that I'm like voluntarily putting out there. I don't know. It really makes me question it now, and just makes me like hyper aware of how much information a lot of power systems have that could be used against us. Yeah, just existentially mortifying. But the more we know, the more we can protect ourselves. Just like be aware of it. I guess ignorance is bliss until you're snatched from the street into an unmarked van and put in a detention facility, right? Anyway, very fascinating book. I enjoyed the reading experience, and I recommend. I gave it 4.5 stars. But yeah, that wraps up my reading for the month. On the lower side, but still got some good ones in. One really bad one, but I would love to hear your thoughts. If you've read any of these, give me recommendations. I'm always looking for things to add to my TBR. Yeah, what an interesting year it's turning out to be. Right now, my current read, physical, and audiobook are both in Spanish. So that'll be an interesting recap next month. I'll be talking about my experience in reading a couple of books in Spanish. And yeah, I'm just looking forward to April. Spring is lovely. I forget how much I love spring and it's perfect like reading outside weather lately. So I anticipate that I'll be doing a lot of that. I hope you're good. Hope you're taking care of yourself. And thank you for being here. Thanks for watching. I will catch you in the next one. Bye.